Hello and welcome to a very, very dirty motor car speed shop. Been doing a kind of light thrash on this particular machine, a couple other projects going on, so there's tons of little garbage all over the place. This is about as clean as I get because these vehicles go back to the customer today. So wanted to give a short little video on this thing before the sucker goes back. Um, this is a Traxxas Summit. This is probably one of the most capable rock crawlers you could ever buy. So it's a little bit, bigger than a 10 scale, probably, I don't know, 8 scale or something like that. But the thing, wheels and tires, cantilever suspension, it will go over anything. I don't even think this thing has lockers front and rear, but it still is near unstoppable. I mean, the thing will flat go over some terrain. There's not a whole lot that's going to stop this machine, but this is more of an aesthetic project rather than a big heavy build suspension, whatnot. But this thing turned into a heavier build. But I will show you some stuff it's way easier than you think it is. This thing took a lot more thinking than it took anything else. So we're going to focus a little bit more on the aesthetics and a little bit more as far as the body's concerned. The body is more of a Jeep Grand Cherokee style of body work. So he wanted this body, a Ram 1500 body, to go on the vehicle. And I thought, oh, this is going to be fun. Slam down the body as far as it could go. Wheels and tires in full compression mode would go up over the top of the bed and over the hood. I thought this thing's going to look super sick. But then he hit me with the big ones. No. I want the front and rear bumpers to stay, and I want the exo cage to go back onto the vehicle. So it ended up turning into this. Now, there's obviously a lot of differences. Obviously, the one was an SUV body. This is more of a pickup truck style body. So all the bars actually came out and down. Those were ripped off of it ripped. I cut them off of it just to make it, maybe a little bit more pickup truck style. This thing I thought was going to be a weekend project, going to be super simple. We looked over both bodies, thought they were roughly the same size, but they are absolutely not. The one is way narrower than the other. So it took a fair amount of modification to try to make this thing fit. I'm still got a little bit of fitment issues that I would want to mess with a little bit. That will probably maybe get done. It'll probably end up going to the customer anyway. So, but this was kind of a fun little project because it's way less intensive than a suspension build. If you've seen my TRX4 Traxxas, the full front 4-link bar setup, that's a pretty big project. And then, of course, if you've seen the Losi LMT, moving all the suspension parts into different places to try to give it the maximum amount of suspension travel, that was a tricky piece, a tricky little project as well. This one, obviously, focusing a little bit more on the aesthetic side of it. So, the cage went on, and I just actually started from the front and moved my way to the back when it came to this. So let's take a peek, rip it off the truck, and we'll let you take a peek at the front of this thing. So the bars actually fit really, really well. And I melted these down a little bit, heated them up to bend them backwards to actually fit onto the bumpers. So it fits and follows the contour of the Ram body pretty well. These is actually factory. They're actually screwed in the factory mounting bits. They actually came in a little bit and fit in and on the older body. So this is exactly the way it was on the factory body. Clearance underneath here, try to get it to lay down a little bit smoother. And then, so that was kind of the simpler part of the project. Trying to make these bars kind of follow the contours of the roof line was trickier because the Ram windshield is sloped way back compared to that other style body where these sit way more up and down. Also, another trick is this cage was significantly narrower. 3/4 of an inch wider is this bodywork. So that made a big trick of trying to make this thing fit well. So actually clearance this, put in another section, ground it down to try to make it look a little bit more like I ground down this just to take out some of the scratches that were already on it, but also allow the thing to give it a little bit more of a rugged look and differentiate the black paint versus the actual bars itself, which had a pretty significant difference in look. That didn't look right. So went ahead and took a piece of ABS plastic and sectioned over the top of it, melted it down to where it actually would fit a lot smoother, bolted it in to make this a way more solid than it was, and to make it just as structural, I don't know, give it that structural rigidity that it had from the old bodywork, and just wanted to make sure that this thing went on its lid. It wasn't just going to snap the glued in parts apart. This won't come apart actually now. Another little trick too is once we laid the bodywork back on with the lights on, it didn't work. So I had to clearance out holes in here so this thing would lay down more flush. That became way more of a bigger project than I thought it was going to be. But it actually turned out pretty good. And the thing looks relatively clean. It doesn't look like it was made this way, obviously, but it's not as terrible as what it probably could look. Actually repurposed almost every piece of this particular machine, every little part and piece that I could have of that cage. So there's not a whole lot that's actually left behind. When it came to the rear part of it, basically just these should have gone outwards along the outer part of the body. This is actually the same section, even though this was probably moved forward quite a bit. Because one of the things I made this particular bodywork as far as the mounts are concerned are in the factory location. You can look back here at these particular mounts, melted them down and flipped them to move them forward in the chassis because had to make it fit a lot further forward once we had the front deal put together. It didn't fit. So it was a mistake on my part, but it actually ended up turning out pretty good, at least in the end with some of the more work that we did to it. So these are actually just glued on. And it's not 100% attached to the body as well, but that was just a way of making this thing, it tied it in, it made it to where it fit pretty well. You actually see too a little bit, there were some more parts and pieces that were left behind, and this thing's actually just screwed to the back of the body. It's 100% just bolted on there. But I felt this tied it in too, because there was nothing on the bed, which I thought looked clean at first, but then the more I looked at it, the more I thought, oh, it just looks naked. Kind of. So once we got all the fitment done, this was actually put on after it was painted. So once I got it fitted all there, and I've done a bunch of that, if you're going to do something like this, especially, it's 100% easier if the body is still clear. I mean, if you're going to put it on a brand new body, if the body's still clear, obviously you can see where all the holes are, because there's mounting holes here, mounting holes up here, as far as there's screws where this thing's completely attached to the body. So it's a lot easier. This thing was actually put on after it was painted, but this was easier to try to fit. It just went over the top of the bed rail, and then this thing was just kind of an extra safety part, at least to hang off the back. The bars that actually came back and over down here were actually lopped off, and then I actually stuck them on the roof of this thing, which was kind of a weird thing to do, but I felt this felt naked. I really wanted to have a bar that tied between these two, but I had used up all the parts that were actually made to go across it, so this one wasn't going to work. So these things are actually, they're just basically screwed directly to the body. There's a nut and bolt on this thing. It's glued onto the outsides, and then I shaved them down, sanded them down to try to give it the same look and to where you couldn't see them. Glued it onto the front. I don't even think these are glued onto the front, I think. They're 100% on just for looks. I just felt this made it look a little bit more aggressive, and it made the top end of the body just, I don't know, it made it fit a little bit better to where it didn't look like this thing was completely just lopped, or just, not lopped, but it was just basically glued onto the thing just for some weirdo look. 100% I think the project turned out okay. The biggest regrets are some of the, I think I need to adjust this. The bodywork kind of flared out a little bit because the way the screws were mounted onto it, as I wanted to put them on nice and tight. These are actually supposed to be the same color. They are the same color, it's the exact same paint, but obviously this is on the inside of Lexan. This is actually in steel. Painted this, cleared it, baked it, which I think the baking process is really what kind of messed up the twin colors. But it turned out okay. Like I said, not a terrible project. If you got a Dremel and a way of heating stuff up, some of this stuff I just heated up on the stove. Just fired up the old stove and just got her a little bit warm. That way we could bend it back to where it would fit really nice. It's not a terrible project. It took way longer than I thought it would. I thought it'd probably take a weekend. It probably took closer to a month and a half. But most of that time wasn't working on it. Most of that time was thinking, okay, how do I do this? How do I do this? I don't know how many times I spent just here in the shop just staring at the body, trying to figure out, okay, how the hell am I going to do this? How the hell am I going to do that? Um, Again, not a terrible project. You can do this, and it's so easy. And the trick is you can't mess this up. I mean, you can make it to where it looked, but in the eyes of most people that are going to see it, they're going to think this looks amazing, and it looks gonna. I'm not saying this trying to brag or anything like this. Honest goodness, you're your own worst critic. If you're like me, I'm my own worst critic. There's always parts and pieces I wish there were better on this thing. I wish the windows fit better in this thing, but this thing wasn't made for it. So most people will look at this and think it's really cool and wonder how you did it. And that's the fun part about customizing some of these things, because obviously nobody has a Summit like this anywhere. Not with this wheel and tire package, not with this body work, not with the cage work. It's 100% one off. And that's what makes it kind of fun. These are the funnest projects to do, is to make something, or recreate, or in this place, repurpose a lot of parts that should have gone. And honest to goodness, this old Summit body's still good. You could put this on anything and it would be just fine to run, because especially that cage kept it from getting a lot of scratches and dings in it. So fun little project. So don't be afraid to get in there, get your hands dirty, and mess around with some of these things. You don't have to run them stock. You can make them exactly yourself. You make them parts and pieces that you can, just go down to the hardware store or a parts store or something like that. You can get some parts, or you can just repurpose this. There's nothing to say that any of this stuff didn't come off a completely different vehicle. So get out there, get your hands dirty. Not just drive these things, but make it your own. Make it to where it's cool to you. Make it cool to anyone who sees it. So it's not a bad project. So get out there, get working on it, and we'll see you again from the Speed Shop real soon.